Taxes on sugar-sweetened beverages now exist in a number of cities in the United States, including Philadelphia, Oakland, and San Francisco, and in more than 40 countries around the world. These have been made possible by dedicated, passionate, and talented people working on the science supporting the use of such taxes. They've evaluated the impact of these taxes and have worked with governments to decide how taxes might be structured and implemented. And there is no person who does all these things better and does so in every corner of the world than Barry Popkin. I'm Kelly Brownell, Director of the World Food Policy Center at Duke University and Professor of Public Policy at Duke. Welcome to the Leading Voices in Food. Barry Popkin is a W.R. Keenan Jr. Distinguished Professor in the Department of Nutrition at the University of North Carolina Gillings School of Public Health. His training is in agricultural economics, and he has done pioneering work on shifts in nutrition and physical activity in country after country around the world, and in fact coined the term nutrition transition to discuss how westernized dietary patterns have invaded countries around the world, and he's documented the health and social impacts of these changes. Recently, he has been the individual most involved in working with cities and countries around the world on sugar-sweetened beverage taxes. Barry, let me begin with asking you to do a quick survey of the soda tax picture around the world. Where do these taxes exist now?
Right now, we have taxes in over 42 countries. Around 12 of those are small islands in the Caribbean or Western Pacific. We have them in the United Kingdom, in France, South Africa, Mexico, Chile, and just a large number of other countries in both Europe, Asia, and Latin America, Thailand, others, and smaller ones in countries like India. So essentially, we've really got in every region of the world sugary beverage taxes.
It's impressive how these have spread around the world and really exist in lots of different places. So let's talk about the structure of these taxes. This might seem like nuance, but isn't. Many people, Barry, would believe that these taxes would logically be a sales tax, but in fact, it turns out to be pretty important how these are structured, and there's a difference between sales and excise taxes. Can you explain how that works?
Well, the main issue for sales versus excise is in the U.S., where a sales tax, you don't see the price when you purchase it. You don't see it on the item when you buy it in the store, whereas an excise tax is put on the manufacturer or the bottler or distributor of the beverage so that you see it. In many countries, though, they put the total tax, the total price, including the tax, on the item. So it depends on the country, but we want people to see the price so that they cut their sugary beverage consumption because they know prices have gone up.
And isn't it true in the U.S. that sales tax is typically a percentage tax and that would encourage people to buy large containers of things? How would that work?
That's true for actually all of these taxes that we do in the U.S. It's based, every one of them is not based on grams of sugar, but it's based on a certain percentage of value. And so that if you base it on volume like liters, or it tends to be that the larger volume get more sugar and it costs less. So it's a little bit complex, but the reality is the ideal way is to base it on the grams of sugar so you have an equal tax for every gram of sugar on the beverage.
So let's talk about how well these taxes work. So you lead a very impressive group of researchers in evaluating the impact of the taxes on sugar beverage consumption, but also on what happens to other beverages as people change consumption of the sugary ones. So what are the results showing so far? Why don't we take Mexico, for example, because you've done a good bit of work there.
Right. Mexico was the first large country in the world to have an evaluation done on it, and the only country initially. And essentially what it showed was that as the tax came in, people shifted from sugar-sweetened beverages to water. And that was enlightening, and that's been the case in Latin America. We don't know how that will work in other regions in the world until people come out with the kind of studies looking at the substitution. But Mexico, people shifted to water, so in fact, it really reduced caloric intake.
So, Barry, how much did consumption decrease and how big was the tax? And were you expecting the shift to be about what it was given the size of the tax?
The tax in Mexico is approximately 10%. The consumption in the first year declined over the whole year by 6%, and in the second year by an additional 4%. So we had, by the end of 2 years, a 10% reduction.
Now, I remember back when you and our group and others were looking at doing some modeling to try to estimate how these taxes would work, because at one point they hadn't existed yet. And as I remember, a 10% increase in price was right about that cusp where you may not have figured that consumption would change. So it's pretty impressive that consumption actually did change by 10%.
Right, but we would assume that that wouldn't affect prices as consumption as much in the U.S. But even in Berkeley, it seemed to affect consumption some. But the higher tax in Philadelphia from preliminary studies shows a much larger effect. And the countries like Saudi Arabia and others that are having a 50% tax, that's where we think we want 20% or more. 50% will truly impact behavior such as that implemented in Saudi Arabia.
So does it kind of work in a linear way that if you go from 10% to 20% increase in price, that the impact is twice as much? And if you go to 30, it's even more? How does that work?
It works in a linear way, but it actually increases the impact as you go up in price, as we've seemed to find, so that going from 10 to 20 doesn't just double the reduction, but it has a bigger effect because people become that much more price sensitive. So whereas we thought it would be linear and equal in reductions, it seems to be a greater set of reductions as the price goes up.
Let's go back to that issue that you mentioned earlier, that people in Mexico, as they were decreasing their consumption of sugar-sweetened beverages, were increasing their consumption of water. That's pretty much the ideal outcome, isn't it? Because they could be going to equally caloric beverages that aren't taxed, or they could be going to diet beverages, and there are questions about those.
Yes, and we were worried that they would in Mexico maybe go to fruit juices or other kinds of sugary beverages, but they didn't. And so the idea was to go to low sugar, non-sugar beverages such as water or tea and coffee, and that would be our perfect solution for the world.
Do you think artificially sweetened beverages should be taxed?
That's a very complex issue. We do have two areas in the U.S. that tax diet beverages because they were done for political reasons to get other city council members to vote for them, because diet beverages tend to be consumed in the U.S. by high-income people. But in contrast, in the United Kingdom, where they have a sugar tax that is tiered, so that for low-sugar beverages, it's a very no tax, and then a minimal tax, and then a very high tax for different tiers. There, they've seen enormous reformulation and substitution of diet beverages for caloric beverages. And so far, they've been pleased with that. The consensus right now in the world is that we would rather people consume water or unsweetened tea or coffee. But if it's a difference between consuming diet sweetened beverages and real sugared beverages, we'd rather they consume the diet beverages.
Well, thanks for that explanation, and I do realize that's a complicated issue. Let's talk about the revenue for a minute. So the revenue generated from these taxes can be considerable, and I know that it's being used in different places in different parts of the world. How is this playing out in different countries, and do you believe it makes a difference in the likelihood that the taxes will be passed, how the use of the revenue is framed?
In every country, we've found that if we can get the country to talk about using the tax for something such as Philadelphia did with daycare, or Mexico talked about putting potable water into the schools, public opinion increases significantly, anywhere from an extra 20 to 30%, up to 40% extra people want to have that, support that tax. So that pushing for some kind of program that increases the well-being of the population, be it child care in Philadelphia, potable water in Mexico, or child health or obesity prevention in Berkeley, certainly has an impact on public opinion and the likelihood of the tax being passed.
Well, that's a real lesson for jurisdictions that are thinking about a tax, frame the issue appropriately about the use of the revenue. So one could imagine many different futures for these taxes, and I'd like to get your sense of where you think they're going. So they could be applied in more cities and countries, and there could just be an increase in the momentum that's occurring now. One could imagine that they could, in the places they exist, be increased so that the size of the tax is greater. You could imagine that they could be placed on other categories of food, say fast food, or even be placed on a constituent of food such as sugar, that would then have a lot more foods being taxed. So where do you think things will go, or where would you like to see them go?
Right now, what appears to be the way countries are going is some are pushing for higher taxes on the sugar-sweetened beverages. And we're hoping, for example, in Mexico, it'll be doubled this year. Other countries are pushing to extend the tax into what we might think of as junk food, which is food high in added sugar, saturated fat, and sodium and salt, and full of refined carbohydrates, so that they're unhealthy foods.
Well, Bear, there's nobody in the world we could have been speaking to who knows more about this topic. So thanks so much for sharing all this information.
My pleasure.
Our guest has been Barry Popkin, W.R. Keenan Jr. Distinguished Professor in the Department of Nutrition at the University of North Carolina Gillings School of Public Health. Thank you very much for listening. If you'd like to subscribe to the Leading Voices in Food podcast series, you may do so at Google Play, Stitcher, Radio Public, or Apple Podcasts, or you can visit our website at the Duke World Food Policy Center. This is Kelly Brownell.